If you've been with us for the past 12 presentations, you know we've been telling stories. Stories. Love to tell stories. As a matter of fact, that's what the Bible's full of, is stories. Isn't that right? And sometimes you wonder why those stories were recorded in the Bible. Indeed, I've questioned some stories, why they're even there. More often than that, I wish some of the details of the stories, they're just listed with a one-liner. I wish some of the details would be there. There's whole gaps between verses in history. I wonder what happened for the next 100 years. I wonder what happened for the next 200-300 years, and the Bible doesn't tell us. And so there's a lot of things that I want to get filled in when I go to heaven. Now I want to go to the authors personally, the ones who wrote these stories, and ask them, do you know more of the details? And I think, you know, people say, hey, you're going to get bored when you go to heaven. Not me. No way. I'm going to spend a lifetime just filling in all the holes and the details and everything. Can you imagine sitting down with Moses and talking to him? And a lot of our stories, you know, have come from his record too. But all these stories we've been looking at, the stories specifically that we've been looking at, have been the stories of the women of the Bible. And we discovered when we started this series that, wow, there's a lot of women mentioned in the Bible. Over 400 different women are mentioned in the Bible. Some without name, but at least they're there. And of course, we've also discovered that women played a very, very important part in the Bible stories. Some of the parts they played were very, very interesting. And there's a conclusion that I've come to that I'll share with you at the end of our study today about this series of looking at the women in the Bible. Now, it was hard to choose just 12 presentations because on the screen you see major stories. And there's at least 45 up there that I could have chosen from. If I did all 45, that'd take us all year long. Maybe that's something we'll do sometime. But anyway, chose 12 presentations. On some of the presentations, we looked at more than just one woman of the Bible. And of course, the most logical place to start, if you're looking at the women of the Bible, is with Eve, the story of Eve. To review, for some of those of you who weren't with us, the story of Eve was looked at through Eve's eyes as she would sit down and share her story with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-greats. How many great-greats do you go? She lived up to 800 years, so how many children, how many generations can you have in 800 years? So, can you imagine her living that long? Can you imagine a family reunion with Eve and her family? Come to think about it, a family reunion with Eve and her family is everybody's ever existed on this earth, right? Because she was the first mother, right? So where's that family reunion going to be? It's going to be in heaven, and every soul that has ever existed on the face of this earth is Eve's relative. Wow, think about that. And that's the way we look. Eve would have had a hard time telling a story to her grandchildren. When you tell stories to your grandchildren, do you embellish the story? When you tell stories to your grandchildren, do you tell everything that happened? Folks, that's what makes the credibility of the Bible so real to me, is because the Bible doesn't hide the bad stuff. It tells the whole story. And that's what makes that piece of literature very credible. Because if you're trying to put something together like the Egyptians did through a couple of their dynasties, they chiseled off everything bad that happened to them and they only recorded the good stuff. That's the way they did. Chiseled almost 300 years of history out during one of the dynasties. Our next woman that we looked at, do you recognize that story? Who is that story? Next, recognize that story? We learned to call her by the right inflection, Rahab, and how God used, right off the bat, God used, wow, she was not only a Canaanite, What profession did she? Well, you can go and read the story in the Bible. But God chooses her. He works through her to accomplish His purposes. The next one we looked at was a story of a little bit of humor in the New Testament. And her name was, there you go, Rhoda. And she left Peter knocking at the door after he'd been released out of prison. Went running and telling everybody, Peter's here, Peter's here. Oh, where's he at? Oh, I left him at the door. She was so excited. The next one we looked at was the story of the two Marys. Well, not the two Marys. We actually had two women here. Mary, the mother of Jesus, and the prophetess Anna. Two women who looked forward to the Messiah being born. One woman spent her entire years at the temple, year after year after year after year, Anna did, thinking that maybe this was the year that the promised Messiah would be born. And before she passed away, she got to see that promised Messiah. We can only hear the stories, and we can accept by faith the Messiah. Anna was rewarded for her diligence by actually face to face looking into the eyes of the Redeemer. And so that was a neat story.